What's going on, YouTube, and welcome to Goal Line Hockey. It's Kevin Forte, and today we are taking a look at the Edmonton Oilers as their season comes up empty, seemingly, again, as they lose in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, losing to the Vegas Golden Knights. They were so close to getting back to the Western Conference Final, but again, they come up short. A really good season, though, overall. We're going to take a look at what happened for the Oilers this season, what is going to happen likely going into the summer, and of course what we think could happen next year for the Oilers. We're going to discuss all of that today. So overall, the Edmonton Oilers had a really good season. They had a couple of downs in the first half of the season that gave you some concern, like, is this team going to be a playoff team, or are they going to just make it? That wasn't the case. They ended up getting 109 points, 50 wins during the regular season. It was an impressive season once again for Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and the Edmonton Oilers. But the problem is, despite not having many injuries, a lot of this team came down to the lack of depth behind the big three. And the good news is there is a big three. So you're looking at McDavid, Draisaitl, and Evan Bouchard. And from there, I hate to say there's a big gap, but there really is a big gap between those three and everybody else on the Oilers. Because you look at this team, right? Draisaitl with 13 goals during the playoffs, McDavid with 8. And then other than that, nobody on the team has scored 5 goals during the postseason for the Oilers. So, when you look at it in that sense, it's kind of like we just kind of ran up short, right? Evan Bouchard had a pretty good playoffs, but there were guys that you kind of were hoping you would get a little more production from. Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins finally got a goal in this series, but it took him a really long time to score a goal in the playoffs. So that was a really big loss for them. Also looking at Evander Kane, he picked up 5 points, but obviously he had his issues during this series, and that's not the reason they brought him in necessarily, but still, you're kind of looking for that guy that's going to produce, and they really didn't have that. You look at a lot of guys on this team, they didn't even register a point, right? Like, I hate to call these guys out, but, Philip Broberg, Matthias Janmark, Cody Ceci, Vinny Desharnais, none of them had a goal during the playoffs for the Oilers. So you can't blame it on those players because those guys aren't there to score for the Oilers, but it's that lack of depth scoring in general that really, really hurt the Edmonton Oilers. You look at a lot of the guys on this team. I mean, Keller Yamamoto a -7. Nugent Hopkins a -6. Like, those are the type of things that it kind of catches up to you. And I think for the Oilers, that and the lack of really decent goaltending, stable goaltending, really did them in again this year. So, and speaking of the goaltending, we can get to that real quick. During the playoffs, Jack Campbell had a .961 save percentage. He played 4 games for the Oilers during the postseason this year. Stuart Skinner had 12 games under his belt, an .883 save percentage, and a 3.68 goals against average. And he only got pulled in one of those games. But I hate to say it, I kind of wish they went to Jack Campbell a little bit more and a little bit sooner, because I know they really wanted to go with Stuart Skinner, but I mean, clearly the stats, again, it's not like Jack Campbell just jumped in for one game. He got 1 win recorded for himself, but he played in 4 games for the Oilers, whether it was in relief or whatever, and his numbers were fairly good. So, I don't know, maybe over the amount of time that Skinner was in, he would have got shelled a little bit more, and he was kind of putting the extinguisher on the rest of the game. But I don't know. I just think it's very odd that the Oilers didn't go to him a little bit more and tighten the leash a little bit on Stuart Skinner. But that's what Jay Woodcroft did, and that's maybe part of the reason the Oilers struggled this year. The problem is we always talk about the Oilers. I mean, you tell me what these numbers look like. 153 points for Connor McDavid. 153 for one player. 153. And then Draisaitl has 128, and Nugent Hopkins has 104. And then Nugent Hopkins scores 1 goal in 2 playoff series. That's asinine. And that's a huge reason why this team really did struggle. You needed more production from Nugent Hopkins, and it really came back to bite them in this series. And when the Oilers had the most success was when they were getting power plays, right? We saw in those first couple games they were scoring a ton of power play goals, driving all the offense, but on 5-on-5, they really struggled in 5-on-5 hockey, and that kind of proved to be the difference in this series. At the end of the day, is second, the Vegas Golden Knights were a little more disciplined, stopped taking a couple more penalties. The Oilers actually saw some troubles with the power play a little bit later in the series, and just like that, their season is done. So that's a lot of negative stuff, but the positive is you have McDavid and Draisaitl. So right there alone, there's reason to be optimistic. Between the two of them, they combined for almost 300 points during the regular season. But at the end of the day, nobody cares about that because you came up short in the playoffs. In 10, 15 years from now, we're probably not going to look and say, yeah, remember that 153-point season for McDavid? No, they got eliminated in the second round again. So, with that said, what does that kind of lead to this summer? Because there's a lot of big decisions for the Oilers moving into this summer. Now, the most recent reports I've been hearing on Evan Bouchard, he's probably going to have to get a bridge deal. And not because the Oilers want to give him a bridge deal, it's because they don't have the money to give him a long-term contract, which is kind of a shame because ideally right now is the time to lock a guy like that up. And once the salary cap goes back up, his number's going to look a lot better in another maybe even 2, if not even 3 years from now. If you sign him to an 8-year deal, you might be getting him at a really nice, steep discount from what the market's going to look like on a bridge deal, which is going to be 2 or 3 years from now. So I think it's kind of a shame, but that is the tragedy of the salary cap era. And for the Edmonton Oilers, where they have a lot of money locked up in some guys like Cody Ceci and Brett Kulak, that's almost $6 million between the two of them. You're telling me you couldn't find a way to get that done with Evan Bouchard? That would have been really good money to have right now to get him locked up long term, but that is not an option because they don't have that money there. And then you also consider you have guys like Warren Fogle, who's making $2.75. He really didn't do much in the playoffs. So when I look at this Oilers team, there's just a lot of money locked up. And you consider Yamamoto's deal is up next year. This is kind of a scary thought, but the summer of 2025, Leon Draisaitl is going to be up. He's got 2 more full seasons with the Oilers. He's making $8.5. You know that number is going to be well above 10 or 11, if not even more than that, closer to McDavid's number at 12.5. It's going to be really interesting to see what the Oilers do with Draisaitl because that is going to be a mega contract. Like if you want to talk about, we always talk about the two-headed monster in Pittsburgh. The new two-headed monster, without a doubt, it's unanimous. It is Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl in the National Hockey League right now. And when I look at this team, I look at those two guys being the identity of this team. This team does not have an identity really other than those guys, which is kind of a shame. And one of the best power plays in NHL history is going to be coming up short in the playoffs because, truthfully, they don't have the talent around McDavid and Draisaitl. And it's kind of one of those things where it's another really disappointing lost season, seemingly. And when you have Stuart Skinner getting a 3-year extension at $2.6 million per season kicking in this summer, that's a little bit concerning with how he played in the playoffs now the last 2 years. Then you consider the fact that the only RFA you have, the only money coming off the books this year is Bouchard, so you have to sign him. You look at some of the other UFAs up front, Derek Ryan, Matthias Janmark, Nick Bjugstad. All 3 of those guys probably not going to be returning. Those were kind of either self-rentals last year or actual rentals they picked up at the deadline. Devin Shore, and then you've got 2 RFAs in Klim Kostin and Ryan McLeod, which I think you should put a priority in terms of all those guys I just mentioned. The latter of the 2, I think Kostin and McLeod should definitely be a part of the Oilers next season. They're young. We saw Kostin is actually kind of he's kind of, I don't want to say the Ryan Reeves of this team, but, alongside a guy like Evander Kane, having 2 guys that can play that role, that's kind of a pain in the neck, willing to protect McDavid at any cost. You want guys like Klim Kostin and Evander Kane on your roster. And I think that the Oilers having those 2 really allows them to kind of play that playoff identity a little bit better. And they did fare pretty well in this series and the last series against the LA Kings in terms of that. But like I said, the lack of scoring depth really has been a problem for this team. And I hate to say, that Darnell Nurse contract looks awful already. That deal just kicked in this year, and it looks like a terrible contract. And I hate to say that. I hate calling out somebody. But, Darnell Nurse really has lost at least a step, maybe even two. And it was exposed during the playoffs this year. And I hate to say it, that suspension between Pietrangelo and Nurse kind of shows you the gap in terms of defensive depth between the Golden Knights and the Oilers. Despite losing their best defenseman, the Golden Knights found a way to pull through. And for the Oilers, one of their top four defensemen, I wouldn't even say Nurse is their best defenseman, but one of their top four defensemen is out, suspended for a game. And they really did not fare very well. And that's kind of how I look at this whole series, is a breakdown of not good enough goaltending, like you're looking at sub 900 save percentage. Like if you could get me a 9 or 910 save percentage on the Oilers as a goalie, you're golden. They probably win a Stanley Cup. But because they can't get the competent goaltending and they're not getting enough depth scoring other than Draisaitl and McDavid, Draisaitl can only have so many 4 goals in a series, right? 4-goal games in a series. That's superhuman to begin with. You can't expect him to do it every game. The depth needs to step up next year. The Oilers have to make some moves here. I do think they're going to go with this tandem next year because kind of by virtue, I don't think anybody's trading for Stuart Skinner's money right now. I'd like to see them bring in a new defenseman, but I don't think they're going to have the money to. Unless they move somebody out, unless they move a Yamamoto or a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, which why would you do that after a 100-point season and making a little over $5 million? You probably don't move Nugent-Hopkins. So who goes here? Is it Evander Kane? Is it Zach Hyman? What are the Oilers going to do? Because I think that they need to fix that blue line. And the only real guy I see in the system that can do anything maybe next year is Philip Broberg, who could be a top 4 defenseman at the NHL level. Other than that, there's really not much there. Maximus Weiner, but he's not ready for the NHL. Goalie prospects, they have a couple. Olivier Rodriguez and Ryan Fanti. That doesn't look like any potential starters in the near future. So, this is kind of a situation where the Oilers have to sit down. Ken Holland has to figure out, if we have to move one player, who do we move to bring in a defenseman? I know Oilers fans don't like the idea of a 1-for-1 trade, but that's kind of what you're looking at here, right? Try and find a 1-for-1 trade that you can maybe get that solid defenseman that unfortunately they're kind of lacking right now. And I know Ekholm was a really good help to the blue line, really good pickup at the deadline. I was all on board with that before they even thought about trading for him. But you also need a little bit more behind that because unfortunately a guy like Darnell Nurse, he's probably going to get bought out at some point because I just don't see how his contract is going to be valuable, right? He's making $9.25 for the next basically decade. Like, that is absurd to me. But let me know what you guys think down below. What do you guys think of the Edmonton Oilers? I think they're 1 or 2 pieces away and really in between the pipes. Like, this is a team that needs to rebuild that depth. And Ken Holland's very good at overpaying for veterans. He's kind of doing that now. He did it with the Red Wings. He's doing it now at the Oilers. I do have my concerns about this team, but I guess I want to hear what you guys think down below. What do you guys think of the Oilers? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.